Hi everyone, and welcome to the January 2013 edition of VolunteerMatch Solutions Best Practice Network webinar. I'm Casey Brennan from VolunteerMatch, and I'm joined today by my colleague Lauren Wagner, hello, who's going to help to moderate our session. So a little later in the session, I'll come back on the line to share some of the findings of our first ever VolunteerMatch Employee Volunteer Program Client Insight Survey, which is the long form of saying that it's kind of our first ever analysis of employee volunteer programs surveyed by our group of Fortune 500 clients. So we conducted the survey among our populations of clients who run employee volunteer programs and are really excited that today is the official release of the findings publicly, so you guys are all getting the first peek at that information. But before that, we're going to be hearing from our guest, Margaret Cody of the Committee Encouraging Corporate Philanthropy, or CECP. Margaret will be sharing with us some of the top trends in corporate philanthropy as detailed by the organization's latest release of its Giving in Numbers report. We hope by the end of the call today, you'll feel like you have a good basis of all the trends in corporate philanthropy and volunteering, and you'll be prepared to take 2013 by storm. So we encourage you to submit questions for myself and Margaret throughout the session, and you can do so in a couple of ways. You can do so by typing into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, or you can also submit questions to us via Twitter by using the hashtag VMBPN and send that to @VM_solutions. We're going to hold your questions until the end of the presentation, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. A second reminder is that we will be distributing a copy of the slides and a link to a recording of this session after the live event. So without further delay, I'm going to go ahead and change the presenter over to Margaret. So welcome, Margaret.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for sharing your afternoon or morning with me, depending on where you are. It's a presentation that I have been looking forward to for quite some time. I think the ability to take a first look at this data while it's hot off the presses is a really unique opportunity. So excited to be part of that. Let me get started with a little overview of who we are as an organization for those of you who aren't familiar with us. The Committee Encouraging Corporate Philanthropy is a nonprofit organization founded in 1999 when the actor and philanthropist Paul Newman came together with a number of other corporate leaders and said community success and business success should be going hand in hand. And some shareholders or those who run businesses sometimes don't share that philosophy, and we don't agree. We think that business success and community success are a natural fit, and we want to showcase the corporate CEOs who believe that philosophy and use their voices to inspire others to do more. Since the organization was founded, we've grown our membership to over 180 CEOs and chairpersons, and really kind of been in a two-way dialogue with those leaders about kind of how their companies can do more, and then learning from those successful case studies and sharing with them what we've learned and sharing what they've learned with others. You might recognize some of the companies who have been members of CECP for quite some time. We're very fortunate to have a lot of large companies, both headquartered in the U.S. but active globally, as well as companies headquartered outside the U.S. participating with us, and very proud to be part of a global conversation about how companies can do more and implement the best ideas on the leading edge of corporate community engagement. Before I go too much further, I wanted to understand a little bit about who's joined us today. I will turn back over to Casey to manage this poll. I wish I had more than 5 answer choices available to me. I think we could have had some fun with that. I apologize in advance to anyone who doesn't see a perfect descriptor for the type of organization that you're representing.
So for everyone on the line, this is an interactive question, so you can click on your screen to select your response and submit that. I'm going to give about 10 more seconds for everyone to submit the answers, and then we'll take a look about who's on the line with us today. So about 5 more seconds. All right, great. And I'm going to close it up now and share the results. And Margaret, are you able to see those?
Yes, I am. Great. So a lot of corporate grant makers on the line. Welcome. Appreciate also those representing grant-making bodies outside the corporate sphere. Big welcome to our nonprofit guests, 32% of you, and consultants in academia. Really appreciate you all coming together. I look forward to a lively Q&A where we can have a benefit of the cross-sector representation that we've gathered today. The way I'd like to use our time together is to go over a couple of key trends that CECP has been tracking. I want to begin, though, with some context of what we've seen as the current state of corporate philanthropy, and then look at a couple of threads that either through our interactions with giving officers or at conferences or on social media or in the work that we do with companies have surfaced for us as been important trends that I think fit in with the VolunteerMatch data. To begin to talk about context, one of the ways that CECP has a position on the way corporate philanthropy is changing is because of an annual survey that we conduct every year. This is a survey that's mostly quantitative, and it asks large companies to report to us the full scope and scale of their corporate contributions. How much did you give? Where did it go? How many people are managing that? What types of volunteer programs do you have? And this is a survey conducted each spring in association with the conference board. We are about a week and a half, 2 weeks away from launching the latest one, and it's the basis of the annual Giving in Numbers series. This is a free report for those of you who aren't familiar with it, with a lot of great data, way more than I could ever put in today's webinar, on how corporate philanthropy is changing when you look at the numbers and trends, and then also some analysis from us of why the numbers are changing the way they're changing. It is a survey that includes cash donations, but also non-cash donations, and as I mentioned, some questions on volunteerism. Just to give you a feel for the type of respondent that we typically get in this survey, we really are talking about very big companies. We do have companies all along the revenue spectrum with all numbers of employees, but if you look at the list of respondents, we do tend to skew towards some of the largest companies in the world. You know, median revenues for us are well over 15 billion with employees, a median of 38,000 employees. So you can tell that we're talking about some big companies here. Across that sample, the median total giving that we see is about 21 million, and that is inclusive of corporate cash, corporate foundation cash, and non-cash. And you can see the breakdown of how that 21 million is composed in the statistics in the middle of the slide. Most of the companies that we work with do indeed have a corporate foundation, not all of them. Some people are surprised to hear that staffing levels might seem modest given the scope of the job. To have 8 staff is typical, and this is to run the volunteerism function and the corporate grant making and the corporate foundation grant making. So you've got a small number of people doing a lot of work. I'm sure those of you representing non-corporate grant makers may feel the same pinch in your organizations, whether you're in a consulting firm or a nonprofit or academia. Maybe that's a statistic you can relate to. And administrative costs about 7% of total giving, and that's on top of the 21 million. We separate out administrative costs from the total giving amount. So with that as a little bit of a window into the types of companies that are supplying data to us, I wanted to go back in time a little bit and just get us all on the same page of what corporate philanthropy has even looked like over the last couple of years, because it has been a really interesting economic cycle for us to watch evolve through corporate philanthropy data. So if we go all the way back to 2007, as we analyze the data, even though there were economic warning signs kind of simmering, 2006 to 2007 was a year that corporate philanthropy was again up. In fact, some companies bumped their giving by as much as 25%. So there started to be some warnings, but corporate philanthropy didn't appear to be affected. In fact, corporate giving had been going up a bit every year for many years at that point, and 2007 was no exception. When we turn to 2008, this is where corporate profits hit rock bottom. You had companies like AIG and Lehman and Merrill and the automakers really making headlines here. But, you know, really the downturn didn't start to make itself fully known until pretty late in the year, and as a result, a lot of corporate philanthropy budgets and non-cash giving had already been allocated and or already been spent by the time that we really saw the U.S. stock market and global stock markets crash in 2008. So corporate giving looked pretty strong in 2008, even though the sky was falling. 2009 is when we saw profits creeping back up, but we saw the downturn reflected in corporate philanthropy. Companies really struggled to maintain the giving levels that they had in the past. Those companies who were able to give more were really stepping forward, but that was pretty unusual. A lot of companies were really trying to say, I know these community needs are stronger than ever, but cash is really in short supply across my company. It's not just philanthropy. How can I be supportive of my nonprofit partners? So we actually saw a lot of creativity and innovation around non-cash. So I think there could be some interesting lessons learned from the depths of the economic downturn that I think opened up some new conversations about what companies have to give beyond cash, since that was kind of a scenario they were backed into, I think, in the downturn. 2010, we were really on hooks waiting to see what the numbers would tell us. We had no idea whether giving would continue to go down or if it would stay steady or it would start to come up. And the answer was it did all of those things. It was really at extremes. Some companies, their giving surged back and it was way higher than it had been in 2007. Others, their giving was really markedly down from where it had been in 2007, and a couple companies in the middle. So to us, the message was that the downturn really didn't have a uniform effect on companies. But those who felt like they were refinding their footing were putting resources back into philanthropy quickly. They weren't in a wait-and-see mode, which we were encouraged by. As I start to talk to you about what we saw in the most recent year data, I'm comparing what we saw in the most recent survey with the low point. So I mentioned that 2009 is when we saw corporate philanthropy take a hit. What I've got on this slide answers the simple question, is corporate giving going up or down? And it's answering that question from the point of view of just summing up all the money across all the survey respondents who gave us data all 3 years. So if you add up all the corporate foundation cash and corporate cash and non-cash giving across the 144 companies who reported survey data all 3 years, you'll see that aggregate total giving is up, which I think is a great headline with regard to the kind of total value of resources going out the door from corporate givers to the nonprofit sector. One thing, though, is that CECP doesn't necessarily love this way of answering the question of whether giving went up or down, because you can have a couple of companies whose actions really take this number up or down, and it doesn't necessarily represent what's happening for companies more generally. So just a couple of outliers can really change the story here. So a way that we really like to look at the answer to the question is giving going up or down is to create a distribution of companies. So this can be a little funny to look at if you've never seen us present data this way before. What we do is we take each company that answered the survey all 3 years, and we compare the most recent data and their 2009 data and say, okay, for Acme Company, is their individual giving up or down from a couple years ago? It's up. How much is it? Is it up by? It's up by 10%. Well, then that means that company would go in this bucket for us. And we take the next company, compare their most recent year giving to their historical giving, find out whether it went up or down and by how much, and that would slot them into these different buckets that you see along the bottom. And by the time you're going one by one through all of the companies, you get this distribution of what happened. So a little bit funny to look at for the first time if you haven't seen it, but we think this gives you a picture of what's going on across corporations more broadly in a way that you just can't see when you're looking at all the numbers added together. And so what we look at here is the percentage of companies whose giving is up compared to the past, which was 60% of our sample. The percentage of companies whose giving is still down from where it was in 2009, which is about a third of the sample, and those for whom it looks flat. So we were encouraged that not only are 60% of the companies in our sample giving more than they were during the low point of the downturn, but some of them are up quite remarkably. We've got a third of our companies whose giving isn't just up, but it's up by 25% or more, which we think is remarkable. We wanted to, in addition to answering the question, is giving up or down, start to use our numbers to understand what grants are looking like. And when we did that, we saw this trend of fewer grants of larger dollar values across fewer issue areas. Let me take you through the data that allowed that picture to reveal itself. We asked companies to tell us how many grants they made each year, and we can then do some simple math on that. We know what their total giving was. We know how many grants they made, so we can divide the total giving by the number of grants and come up with an average grant amount or grant size, and that's the number that you see in blue. I don't love that number. I wouldn't base a ton of my decisions on that number because obviously some companies can make a $5 million grant to one nonprofit and then a lot of $5,000 grants to hundreds of others. So average grant size doesn't necessarily tell you that much because we know that grants can come kind of big and small. But what I do think it allows us to do, and why we do take the time to do this calculation, is because when you watch that average grant size change over time, I think it does give you a window into how focused companies are becoming. And what you see in this blue line here is that the average grant size is going up. So I don't think it literally means that companies are making, $37,000 grants, but I do think it's interesting that this number is trending upward over time, which means that the grants that they're making fewer grants over time relative to how much they're giving out. The red line that we have here is looking at how many grants each individual giving officer makes as a proportion of the total giving that the company does. Again, this is just some simple division that we do that I don't think yields a number that's that actionable, but I think the trend is the reason why we do it. Looking how it's changing over time makes this number interesting. And what we can see is that each individual giving officer is making fewer grants year over year. So the grants are getting bigger and the giving officers are making fewer grants. I will say for those corporate grant makers on the call, a common question is, does this include matching gifts? And the answer is no. We actually pull out the matching gift data, which would cause this chart to look pretty different. So once you've pulled matching gifts out, we see grant size getting larger and the number of grants per giving officer getting smaller. Another thing that we have the ability to do from this survey is to see how much giving is being spread out across a number of different focus areas. So we asked companies in the survey to tell us, how much did you give to K-12 education? How about arts and culture? How about health and human services or civic and public affairs? We have these categories of grant making, and we ask companies to tell us how much they gave in each of those areas. Well, we can see over time whether their giving is pooling more heavily in a fewer number of grant categories, these programmatic focus areas. And what we've seen is that it is becoming more focused. It's becoming less common that a company's giving is spread evenly across all of the grant areas that we've listed and becoming more concentrated. So one thing that's kind of popping out for us when we do some of these calculations is that it looks like companies are becoming more selective in the grants that they're making. So we actually, when we had all of our giving officers together last summer, showed them this data and asked them, why do you think this is? We have a hunch that it's because you're more strategic, but there could be other explanations too. So I want to ask the audience today, put your experience to work here. Can you answer this poll question for us, and we'll see what answers we get.
And again, for everyone on the line, this is an interactive poll. So Margaret is asking to complete the headline, companies are more focused because the first one is that they're more thoughtful and strategic about how they give. And number two is that they have fewer staff and management resources, which means that they're more efficient. So you can make a selection on the screen, and I'll give about 10 more seconds for everyone to get their answers in. And a few more seconds here, and then I'll close the poll and show the audience the results. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and close it and share the results with you. And Margaret, you should see that on your screen as well.
I do. That's a wonderful result. I'm seeing that 77% of you think they're being thoughtful and more strategic, and a little less than a quarter of you are saying that it's fewer staff and management resources. That is so close to the result that we got when we asked this question among our giving officer audience. It was about 80%, so pretty close to the 77, saying it's because we're more strategic about where we give. But then, in our case, it was 20%, pretty closely matched with the audience's responses today, that, what, this is also kind of reflective of a new reality, and maybe we're making fewer grants because our resources are constrained. So I think that we've got the majority answer, but we have to also be pretty smart that we are in kind of a new normal for some companies, and it could just reflect tighter resources. Another trend as an organization that we've been looking at that I think is a nice blend with the material that you'll be hearing from Casey later is the trends that we're seeing in non-cash giving and employee engagement, which I alluded to a little bit earlier. We are in conversation with these corporate givers, and something that I often talk to them about is, hey, if you could let some of your nonprofit partners know something about your mindset, about your giving right now, what would you like to share? And this is something I've talked to people about at conferences and at our own conference and over emails and one-on-ones. And a theme is emerging across what they'd like to share, which is, what makes us unique as a company is that we have cash grant making just like every other type of giver, and some resources that might be unique to corporations that we'd also like to bring to the table. We see ways that we can be a more complete partner to our nonprofits, and we'd like to leverage some of those resources, whether it's helping you renegotiate your lease or printing your annual brochure in-house, or helping you think through a logistics challenge for a company that's got a great logistics team, or some pro bono service projects like relaunching your website, in addition to any manufactured goods that the company has, or any excess materials like computers that they have to donate. Employee volunteers is coming up more and more on this list also, which is, we want to support you with cash. We understand how important cash grants are to the nonprofit community. We trust you to use that judiciously, but let's start a conversation about the other ways that we can help you achieve your mission. It could be that we have some resources that would be easy for us to give that you could make great use of. So in the survey, which you saw on that context slide that I had earlier, we've got kind of a breakdown of just how much of a typical company's giving is non-cash. So what you see in this bar chart here is the top row shows you what the breakdown is across all companies, but then as you go vertically down the list, you can see how this breakdown changes depending on the industry that's represented. So for the typical company, 20% of their total giving is non-cash, but you can see that for financial services and utilities firms, that shrinks, partially because they're not manufacturing products that they can give away. But for other industries, it's quite significant. It's easy for us to call to mind companies in the pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare sector for whom donation of medicines is a significant part of their total giving. But you'll see not all of it. Those companies are still making pretty significant cash grants as well. One thing that we have the ability to look at, too, that's really fun for us is, for the companies who are able to give more from 2009 to 2011, how are they giving more? Are they making more cash grants? Is more activity coming from the foundation? Are they making more non-cash grants? That's what you see on the right-hand side of the slide in the green. And for companies whose giving is still down from where it was in 2009, why is that? Are they pulling back their non-cash, their direct cash foundation cash? So as you look at the left and right, we've divided companies by whether they were able to give more compared to where they were in 2009. And what this slide shows me is that non-cash is actually a pretty volatile giving type. For companies who are giving less, it's swung down by close to 50%. And for companies who are giving more, it's up a third. So one thing we talk to our companies about is there any way to smooth out the reliability of non-cash donations? And in some cases, that just might not be possible. The giving officer doesn't have control over how much inventory will be left over to donate, or whether or not there'll be a piece of machinery or a piece of land or intellectual property that can be donated. But to the extent that giving officers can, I think it would be a positive step to make this source of contributions more even and stable over time. Foundation cash, by contrast, even though it's swinging, tends to be the most stable of the giving type. What we've got on this slide here are kind of some parameters for how we think about employee engagement, because this is something that we're hearing our CEOs talk more and more about. And it was helpful for us and our partners at Taproot and the Billion Plus Change and other partners to understand that different types of volunteerism can use very different corporate skills. So you've got extra pair of hands volunteering on the left, using some core skills, board service, and then all the way up to something that CECP would consider a non-cash equivalent of pro bono service, where you're really taking the skills that the employee uses directly in their job every day and applying them to the benefit of a nonprofit partner. So one thing that we look at in our survey is trends in pro bono service and other types of volunteerism, both on and off company time. One thing that we also look at as an organization, I've kind of run you through these highlights because the details of them are in that free giving and numbers report I alluded to earlier, is how global volunteering is becoming. So we ask companies to tell us a little bit about the different types of programs that they run, and if you want to see what the numbers look like domestically, they'll be in that giving and numbers report. But we also wanted to understand how much exporting of different types of volunteer opportunities is happening. And what this slide shows you is differences between 2009 and 2011 in whether these programs are offered abroad. So this is just a slide on what's offered internationally, and we can see that for a couple of different types of volunteer opportunities, we see growth in programs abroad, whereas just a couple of years ago, those might have been domestic only. The last trend I wanted to walk you through was a conversation that started a couple of years ago, but I think is really starting to have its moment now, which is the concept of shared value. This is a reference to an article that came out on the cover of the Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago now by Professor Porter at Harvard Business School and Mark Kramer at FSG, building on the shoulders of some other great thinkers before them, but really sharpening this concept of blending core business strategy with an eye toward solving social problems. So this is something that if you haven't had a chance to look at this Harvard Business Review article and you have an interest in the way corporate philanthropy is changing, I encourage you to take a look at this article because it really shares kind of a mindset of how companies are starting to think about how the core of their business can be brought to bear on some of society's toughest challenges. This is something that CECP has published a couple of reports on also because we care very much about the future of corporate philanthropy and where it's going. So the Shaping the Future report that we did with McKinsey said, what are some big trends facing companies and what's that going to mean for their philanthropy in 10 years? And what are some things that a big company who sees these trends on the horizon can do now to prepare for this new future? And the Business at its Best report is about, okay, how do you do it? If you're excited about shared value and you have an appetite for doing more, what are some obstacles you might face in implementing that kind of a strategy, and what are some ways that the experience of other companies can accelerate your progress on that? Both of these reports are based on interviews with the leading CEOs in the world on what their company is actually doing, how they're taking this new mindset and putting it in motion throughout the business. One thing that I think is very important for us all to keep in mind, though, is as exciting as this conversation is about shared value and sustainable value creation, really it builds on rather than replaces other things that the firm does. So you can't run a business if you're not fulfilling your core business mandate. I've got that in the bottom box in blue on the left. We're not asking companies to no longer focus on profits and returns to their owners or creating products and services that people love. But you might find that if that's all you focus on, you're not really doing enough and you're not necessarily laying the groundwork for your company to be sustainable over time. A lot of companies build on their core business mandate with corporate social responsibility and philanthropy. Not only are they being good stewards of the resources under their care, but they're also thinking about how they can give cash and product to support nonprofit partners and community objectives. And then this concept of shared value or sustainable value creation is really building on top of that. So we don't think shared value is going to replace philanthropy. In fact, I'm going to be doing a series of blog posts in The Economist on that. But we do think they are all mutually reinforcing, and that what you learn by fulfilling your core business mandate and by being a responsible corporate citizen informs a sustainable value creation mentality and strategy. So for those of you who are interested in kind of learning a little bit more about how top CEOs are thinking about the future of philanthropy and their businesses, those could be some interesting resources for you to check out. I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts that I thought might be useful to today's webinar audience on that topic of unique assets once again. Again, based on some conversations that we've had with our members and others, one of the things that we've heard people say is sometimes corporate grant makers realized that there was a pain point that their nonprofit partner was facing that they were unaware of, that they wish they had known about earlier. And I know that I've heard from some nonprofits that it can be a little bit delicate to talk about your pain points with your funder. But the message that I'm hearing from some of our nonprofit partners, and I'd be interested to see how this ripples out in some of the comments, is actually we want to be a good partner to you. There could be greater flexibility than you realize. Talk to us about some of the things that are a strain on your nonprofit organization, and maybe we can jointly problem solve together. So an example of this would be, a company wants to give you 100 computers and you can only use 30 as a nonprofit, and kind of not wanting to say no or something like that. There could be some challenges that you face as a nonprofit, and the message I'm getting from the corporate audience is, let's talk about that. Don't feel like you have to bear that hardship alone. So some of the bullets on this slide kind of deal with that thematically, also kind of getting those hard details out in the open so that you can problem solve jointly. Also, the topic of management costs, I think, is coming up more and more. As programs become more kind of complex and people get involved in designing programs with their nonprofit partners, sometimes there's a greater cost of administration. And it can be easy to focus on how much money it'll cost to create the program that serves the end beneficiaries, but is additional staffing required? Is additional office space required? Is additional software technology required? And really trying to get some of that management cost thinking done up front so that it can be built into the grant. Because certainly finding that out late in the project when you have fewer options available to you is less successful for the nonprofit and then doesn't feel as good for the corporation in terms of being your partner. So really trying to get more thought out up front about what the cost of administration might be. And then also we had a great panel with some nonprofit leaders at our summit last summer and some great corporate voices too, where they said, you know what, sometimes saying no in the short term can be a good move in the long term. Maybe it opens up different possibilities for that partner in the future, or maybe it's just not a match. Don't be afraid to say no if your gut on either side is telling you that it's not a fit. With the huge variety of different programs and interest areas that companies have, there's a right funder out there or there's a right grantee out there. If your gut is telling you no, you should probably listen. So just a couple of thoughts before I turn it back over to Casey. Again, to remind you to make use of the resources that CECP has available for free on our website. We also have International Corporate Philanthropy Day coming up at the end of February. We would love it if you had an announcement to make that you shared on that day or a program that you wanted to launch. Take advantage of the platform. We've got some ideas for you on our website. And then any corporate grant makers on the call who don't participate in the survey, it's free to submit your numbers. We'd love to have your data in the pool. So with that, I will turn it back over to Casey.
Great, Margaret. Thank you so much, and thanks so much for bringing in commentary from all kind of sides of the table, including sort of implications for nonprofits as well as you went through that. A couple of reminders for everyone. You can continue to submit questions through the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Looks like I'll try to run a bit quickly through my slides. So we have about 10 minutes at the end to take all your questions for both Margaret, and if you have any questions for me as well, please feel free to submit those. Another reminder, again, we will be sending everyone a follow-up email with links to our recording, and we'll also include links to the CECP information website if you missed that on the last screen. So thanks again for everyone for joining. I'm really excited to kind of share the findings of a project that VolunteerMatch has been conducting over the summer, actually, and into the fall with the analysis. We define insights very specifically at VolunteerMatch. We define them as actionable, measurable recommendations based on experience or analysis. And our insights program comes to life in a variety of ways. And there's a couple ways specifically that everyone in the public can participate. First, we have a subgroup on LinkedIn for VolunteerMatch Solutions where there's hundreds of other community engagement professionals that are conversing and talking about trends in volunteer engagement or CSR in general. In addition, we have a blog specifically for business leaders called Volunteering is CSR, and we encourage you guys to visit these to share your experience, ask questions of your peers, and really use these resources as a platform for collaboration among all of you. So this is sort of the lens that we've approached our survey. And we fielded the survey between August and September of 2012 with a few goals in mind. First, we wanted to kind of benchmark what makes a strong employee volunteer program. So this is getting very specific compared to what Margaret just shared with us. So we're getting a little more tactical in nature when we're talking about specifically employee volunteer programs. So we already track outputs from all of our clients who use the VolunteerMatch system to manage their community engagement needs. But really what we wanted to analyze was really, okay, so we know that people are doing a great job and getting great results, but what is it that they're putting into that to make it so successful? So first we wanted to kind of benchmark what the inputs were. Second, we wanted to really create an analysis that would inform our client base and identify opportunities for them to continue to strengthen their program. So kind of create a pool of data that's specific to them. And finally, sharing those best practices with anybody who's running an EVP, even if they're not a VolunteerMatch client. So really, again, contributing to the community. After the fact, you see the cover of our fact sheet here. We're going to be posting the results on our website, but I will be following up with everyone who registered for the webinar today with a link to download the full survey results. So again, we're not going to cover everything, but I'll try to get through some of the major trends today. And so before I dive into the key findings of this study, it's important to understand why we believe that the VolunteerMatch clients are a valid pool of participants. We didn't necessarily have the same scope as CECP, who's done this multi-year, really high-level report, but we still kind of went in with confidence that this was a good base. We specifically chose to limit the pool to our clients for a couple of reasons. First, because we already have a relationship with these organizations that are running these types of programs, so they made a great accessible pool for us to do this study. Our second reason was because we have 2 third-party studies that qualify VolunteerMatch clients in their programs as highly effective versus the average. So I just wanted to quickly share an overview of these 2 external studies so that you can kind of understand the basis for this. And understand why this gave us confidence that the program inputs from our clients could serve as best practices for all companies to build from. So the first third-party study was conducted by Boston College Center for Corporate Citizenship. It's called the Drivers of Effectiveness in Employee Volunteering and Giving Programs. So this is a survey that continues to be open to all companies and continues to be available. So there's a link at the bottom there, volunteerbenchmark.com. So if any of you are interested in submitting your company's data into this, it still is live and you're welcome to take it. We had the researchers of this study pull out data from a list of current VolunteerMatch clients and to compare those averages of our clients against the averages of all the participants, which included Fortune 500 companies. And out of the 6 drivers used in the analysis, VolunteerMatch clients outperformed the average in 4 of those drivers that you see on the screen here. So this information tells us that on average, our clients' programs are well aligned with business practices, supported by the corporate culture, and also really well measured. So the second study we took a look at was True Impact's Volunteerism ROI Tracker. We once again had the researchers of this study pull a comparison of our clients against the average based on the True Impact tool used. And again, we found that the VolunteerMatch outperforms the average across all 8 volunteer tracker impact categories. So again, this is something that is ongoing, and you're welcome to reach out to the True Impact team if you're interested in evaluating your own program in the same way. And again, these 2 studies were kind of in combination of something that said, okay, so we see on average we're outperforming other practitioners, so let's take a look at all those inputs and see really what makes the program so strong. So to start off, I wanted to, similar to what Margaret did earlier, is provide a snapshot of the average participant in this survey. All of the programs that we evaluated range in size, age, number of employees. It was a really broad spectrum. However, we think that the numbers are very telling into what types of commitments are put forth and how broad the scope of employee volunteer programs need to be in order to account for all the broad stakeholders, particularly considering that these programs are managed by a really lean staff. So looking at kind of what we learned about the program. So a majority of the programs that participated in this survey were established in the last 2 years. However, the average age across all was 6 years. So for the majority of those programs that are still new, there's a lot of testing going on, creating trial and error, trying to figure out what the right mix of inputs is for a program to be successful. Again, those inputs will vary based on the corporate culture, but generally this is sort of a testing period for those organizations. And then if we're looking at the average, which is 6 years, we consider 6 years to be sort of a program that's past its infancy, but that there's still a stage that's important to evaluate and refresh the program to make sure that you're maintaining employee interest over time. And finally, if we look towards the right, where the older programs, it's likely that these programs are really well integrated into the corporate culture and widely accepted and adopted by the staff. However, it's also important for these seasoned programs to be focusing on maintaining relevancy and not allowing the program to remain stagnant. So again, looking at sort of the range here of the ages of the programs that we evaluated. And a majority of the programs that we surveyed are managed by specialty departments such as corporate philanthropy, community involvement, or corporate social responsibility. And this number demonstrates that many organizations are taking a programmatic approach to employee volunteerism. So it's, looking beyond employee volunteerism to approach community involvement in a variety of ways, shown in the fact that they actually have entire departments dedicated to these types of activities. So one key takeaway from our survey was how overworked employee volunteer managers are. So for each full-time equivalent program manager over here in the blue, which can include a combination of, for example, 2 employees that spend half of their time on the employee volunteer program. So of one program full-time equivalent, there are over 32,000 eligible employees who are going to be looking for ways to get connected to this employee volunteer program in some way. So there's obviously a huge discrepancy here. There's a lot of work going on, and that program manager really does need some help. So I think the ratio here illustrates the importance of building relationships and solutions that help this program manager make it easier for all those people to engage in volunteer activity who are interested. So whether it's a partner like VolunteerMatch that makes connecting to those thousands of employees with active opportunities in their local communities, or an event vendor who might take some of the pressure off of planning a day of service or even a month of service, these partners are really invaluable resources that make sure that the lean program staff has more time to focus on improving and evolving the program rather than simply administering it. So again, a lot of work to be done, a lot of people to engage, and there's really a need for a lot of those solutions to come to life. So now that we have kind of a sense of the age and the management and the size of these programs, I wanted to take a look at some of the trends in the way these programs are supported through internal activities. So really what's going into this and how is it all working? So given that we just looked at how lean the program staffing is, many organizations in results have built volunteer committees or councils to help support that program facilitator, and many times helping to localize the activities that are happening across geographies or interest areas. So these councils or committees are most commonly organized by geography or office location, or they're centralized at the headquarter office and distributed among different staff members, or by department. So what we love about these volunteer committees is that it allows opportunities for highly engaged employees to get more involved with the program and play a bigger role. So finding the employees who are highly motivated to take part in the program may also make great candidates for some of the management and coordination of the activities. So this not only relieves the pressure of the overworked program manager, but also allows an opportunity for the committee members to gain more experience and even develop professionally in ways that they might not otherwise have access to. So when we're looking at the benefits such as professional development from a program, volunteer committees or councils can be a great way to kind of develop professionally in addition to kind of showcasing enthusiasm for volunteer activity. So one of the most telling data points from the survey was around program budgets. And I know Margaret touched a little bit on sort of what went into overall corporate philanthropy, but we found that program managers reported an average of about $38 per employee per year for program operations. So this includes administrative costs, event fees, and materials to run that program. However, when we asked what dollar amount program managers think they need to run an optimal employee volunteer program, respondents indicated that they would require close to $62 per employee per year to be running something that they considered optimal. And this represents a desire to have 64% more budget than they currently have to run the program in the best way possible. So obviously here we're recognizing a gap in sort of what current funding has for these programs and what they think they need to really run it at an optimal level. So this to us is a really interesting gap to identify. A majority of program managers who participated in the survey reported a high level of leadership involvement, which was really great to see. And this is something that we don't just see in volunteer engagement, but something that we see across all types of CSR activity, is that, for community involvement to be really embedded into a corporate culture, it requires not only buy-in from senior leadership, but also enthusiasm, support, and involvement to lead that effort. So leadership involvement can be something as simple as having volunteer thank you sent from the CEO, or it can be having the CEO and other members of the senior leadership actually participate in the program, or as far as actually even having the CEO as the main spokesperson for the initiative, so positioning that person as the deliverer of internal and external communications about that community engagement program. So when employees or the community at large sees that it's not only the company that cares enough to help, but also the company leadership, it's really a priceless opportunity to really bolster the reputation of the organization as not sort of a thing, but also people behind that, and showcasing the leadership as such, which is really great. So next, I wanted to look at some of the findings of specific program attributes. So we know that each program must be tailored to the specific culture, assets, and strategic priorities of the company that it's serving. But it's also interesting to see what attributes are popular across all program types and sizes. So the first thing we noticed is that most of the survey participants had strategic or national nonprofit partners involved with their employee volunteer program. So as Margaret shared earlier, there's fewer issue areas that companies are dedicating to across all of their corporate philanthropy. And again, we saw that a majority of them are also creating strategic partnerships with specific organizations around their program. And on average, we saw an average of 4 strategic partnerships. And when we talk about these partnerships, they go deeper than simply sending the employees out to volunteer with that organization. You know, your company might have support hundreds or even thousands of organizations in that way, but we see strategic partnerships as something that's embedded into the program and often present across all office locations. So for example, our client Whirlpool has a strategic partnership with Habitat for Humanity, where they not only send employees out on bills regularly year over year, but they also make in-kind donations to each of those projects. So it shows kind of a deeper commitment level to that organization. So partnerships to us are a really notable attribute because we believe that when companies align volunteer efforts with the needs of the nonprofit, it's more likely to create a lasting and meaningful impact. And when the relationships are formed over time and across many types of CSR activities, they tend to have a deeper understanding and sharing among those partners, which allows a higher level of trust to be formed. And if we think about what makes partnerships successful, that trust is really important. Next, we found that most participating organizations are hosting an annual day, week, or month of service with their volunteer engagement program. And while we didn't specifically look at the outputs in the study, which would be, you know, how many people participated in those events, we commonly counsel clients to hold service events as a way of encouraging that participation. And the real magic that with service events, whether it's a day of service or a week of service that you're rallying people around, is that they create an important touch point for an employee volunteer program that's hard to achieve year-round. So, you know, the fact that you're requiring employees to take some type of action during a service event that's time-bound, it might be social, you might organize people into groups for that day of service. There are much more of also cultural bonding events for the company as they are impactful for the nonprofit. So again, we didn't report specific outputs, but inputs. We know that a majority of these people are hosting these days of service, and that's something that we know that really helps with participation rates for corporate volunteer programs. So looking out, service events are a great way to ignite participation, but in order to sustain year-round participation in the program, it's smart to recognize or incentivize employee volunteers in some way. So we found a variety of ways that organizations are doing this, including something like thank you letters, contests, or awards, or supplemental program elements such as Dollars for Doers, where employee volunteers earn monetary donations for the organization for each hour served. So again, a wide variety of ways that companies are recognizing that participation so you can encourage ongoing participation throughout the year and not just with that service event that people are holding. For companies who are seriously devoted to keeping their employees engaged, we saw that they often offer paid time off to volunteer as a benefit, as part of their benefits package. So this is typically pending manager or department approval and is usually a set amount of time per month or per year. And the survey found that on average, employers are offering 17 hours of paid volunteer time off, or PVTO as we've called it here, each year. But each of the policies really vary by employee type. For example, this is for full-time employees, but somebody who is an employee at a factory or at a retail location might vary in the amount of paid volunteer time off that they have. And so we think that volunteering during work hours breaks down some of the major barriers of workplace volunteering, in that it demonstrates that the company's commitment and encourages employees to spend time during work hours out in the community connecting with causes that they care about. And it also pairs nicely if the company has an initiative that encourages group volunteering, as it helps, it offers the opportunity for employees to coordinate their schedules during work time, maybe on a Friday afternoon, versus trying to coordinate after hours or on the weekends where people have other family commitments. So one surprise from this survey was that we found the amount of reported skilled and pro bono volunteering are still relatively low. And while this isn't necessarily a negative or a bad finding, we do see this as an untapped opportunity for companies as they continue to improve their employee volunteer programs over time. It's something that we also predict that as programs age and they kind of mature over time, that they're going to be looking for more sophisticated ways for employees to get involved. So that we predict that we'll see this number grow, and we'll be looking for, as companies are looking for more opportunities to leverage the skills of their workforce, or offering pro bono service to the nonprofit partners. Again, Margaret shared that spectrum of engagement, and skilled and pro bono tends to be on the higher level, but we're still seeing a majority of the activity in these programs happening sort of in more traditional hands-on volunteering versus skilled. And particularly with initiatives such as the Billion Plus Change gaining strength, we think that the barriers to creating those skilled and pro bono opportunities will continue to be lessened as we get better educated about how to run these effectively, since they do take a lot more program input on the management side. But as we continue to share best practices among corporate practitioners, we think that more organizations will feel comfortable implementing that part of their program over time. So this is something we predict to see a shift in the future. So the final section I wanted to cover during our time today is program evaluation, which is looking at what's important to program managers to track as they as they're facilitating these programs. So when asked what types of metrics employee volunteer managers are actively tracking, we found that there are often many types of metrics rather than just one. So the most popular metrics were how many volunteers are volunteering and how many hours are volunteered in total. Skipping ahead, we actually asked everyone if they could only choose one of those program metrics to track, meaning participants could only choose one of those metrics. Most indicated that the number of employees volunteering and their interest was most critical. And so in contrast to the last question, employee interest metric took over the second most popular response in place of volunteer hours. And this highlights that it's not only important for program managers to be looking at employee volunteer hours, but that the employee's interest in that program is actually weighted even more. Finally, we asked what organizational benefits were most influential for the program, and we're really pleased to see that employee engagement and morale were at the top of this. So over time, we predict that we'll see a leveling of benefits such as business ROI and professional development as more standards of measurement are implemented to track the progress towards these types. Right now, business ROI related to employee volunteerism is really difficult to track, but as those get more sophisticated, we see that becoming an even more important benefit that program managers can actually report on and share with the public. So I know we're tight on time, but I actually just wanted to share a few tips for program success, and then we'll go ahead and take your questions. So first is to track, measure, and report like crazy. So when we see gaps in program funding or headcount, such as I want more budget to run my employee volunteer program, we understand that it takes senior buy-in to provide those resources. And the best way to get attention of senior management is to demonstrate impact and ROI whenever possible. So the tools that our clients use at VolunteerMatch are designed to help track, measure, and report on program inputs, and we always encourage our clients to give ongoing attention and assessment of those benchmarks through quarterly program reports and counsel from their client relationship managers. But whatever tools you use for management, make sure that you're building ongoing evaluation into that so that you can continue to evolve the program over the time. Second is to identify program champions. So most of the employee volunteer management teams are small and mighty, and the best way to grow program capabilities is to share some of those responsibilities with others. That's not to say that you're passing the buck, but in fact, groups of enthusiastic participants can be organized into volunteer committees or councils, which showcases their contagious passion and enthusiasm while helping to ensure that the program is successful. So identifying these champions and then empowering them to help is really a win-win for the program. Third is to integrate staff skills and expertise. Based on the survey, we saw that skilled and pro bono work is still an untapped opportunity. And we know external studies are showing that skilled opportunities not only lead to all the engagement benefits that we already know to be true, but they can also help with staff skill development, leadership development, business innovation, and greater social impact. So really we see any opportunity to integrate staff skills and expertise as a real benefit to the program overall. And finally, our mantra here at VolunteerMatch with our corporate programs is evolve, adapt, and repeat. So we actually use a volunteer program change model to evaluate our companies on an ongoing basis. And we know that these principles hold true based on the survey results. So with an average age of 6 years, many of the programs are already established, and now is the time for them to continue to evaluate, evolve, and adapt the key components, whether it's the communication channel or program inputs or incentives, to ensure that long-lasting success. So with that, we're going to take some questions from the audience, and I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to pose questions. And again, if you have any coming through, we'll get to as many as we can right now, but otherwise we will follow up individually with any that we don't get to.
Okay, so the first question actually we're going to pose to Margaret. So regarding the slide where you talked about employee volunteer programs internationally, we had a question about whether you saw any data that would explain kind of why the focus on international programs is up, or what's driving that growth internationally.
My sense of that actually comes more from my interactions with giving officers than it does from data. The numbers show us the trend. The analysis I will report is kind of more anecdotal, but a lot of it has to do with the growth of the corporate footprint abroad. The proportion of revenues, profits, and employees and customers outside the country where the company is headquartered. So if you have more business activity abroad, often a question that the company will ask quickly is, you know, how can we demonstrate our values abroad too? And so I think a lot of that growth has got to do with corporate growth. In fact, we actually peeled back the survey data and looked at the percentage of companies who had increased their giving over recent years. And a lot of the companies whose total giving had gone up, it's because they were more profitable, and a lot of that profit growth was coming outside of the domestic country where they're headquartered.
Great, thank you. The second one, also a question for Margaret. Can you revisit kind of what goes into non-cash giving and why you feel that that was kind of the most volatile of the ones that changed over the years?
Sure. Some of it has got to do with inventory management. So a lot of non-cash contributions can come in the form of products that the company has produced that for one reason or another is not absorbed by its normal customer base. So it's quote-unquote left over, and oftentimes that product is a good candidate for donation if it's usable by the nonprofit community. And how much inventory is kind of remaining from month to month or quarter to quarter or year to year can vary a lot based on the kind of predictions and raw material inputs and all of the other things that go into how much product the company makes. And so a lot of kind of macroeconomic factors and company-specific factors can change kind of how much you produce and how much you overproduce. But there are some other things that I think also play into that volatility. Some, as I began to allude to, was about one-time gifts. We've known situations where perhaps the company goes through a merger, and in that merger acquires a big piece of land that the company can't make use of, and they'll make a donation of that land to a nonprofit partner, or there'll be a piece of intellectual property that they donate, or I worked with a company once who had a really sophisticated piece of highly specialized machinery that had a really high dollar value, and in the year that they gave it, their non-cash looked really high, but they didn't have it to give again. It was a one-time thing. So there can be all kinds of unique situations in a given year where a company has an asset that's just non-recurring. Some other things can be the value of the donation itself. We worked with a toy manufacturer once where every year they chose a toy that they produced to give away around the holidays, and kind of depending on the toy they could give about the same number of units of that toy, but depending on the dollar value of that toy, the non-cash donation appeared to be more or less generous. When it was kind of the same program they had every year, just depending on the toy they gave away, it was either worth more or worth less. And then sometimes even currency fluctuations. You know, if you're an international company and you're giving in a lot of geographies, kind of reporting all of your data in US dollars, depending on how currencies are fluctuating in local markets, can make the value of your giving look really different when you gave the same amount as you did last year, but based on kind of currency translations, it looked like more or less. So some of these things are kind of things that can occur every year. Some of them are more one-time. But I think all of that starts to give us a picture of why non-cash can be so jumpy.
Margaret, thank you so much. And obviously, with all the questions that we've gotten in today's session, there's a lot of complexity that goes into corporate philanthropy and volunteering. And we hope that the session today helps clarify some of those trends and inputs. But unfortunately, we are a little bit over time right now. So I wanted to leave us with a couple of reminders. First, there's a couple ways that everyone on the line can stay informed about upcoming sessions. We do have these calls monthly. And so there's the volunteering@csr.org, our corporate blog, where we always announce upcoming sessions. You can also follow us on Twitter @VM_solutions. And finally, there's a newsletter sign up on the sidebar of the blog, which we send to you monthly if you opt into it. A quick kind of preview of next month's session. We're going to, on February 12th, we're going to have Catherine Smith, who's the Executive Director of the Boston College Center for Corporate Citizenship. We referenced a couple of the center studies, but we're actually, Catherine will be sharing findings of the center's just released State of Corporate Citizenship report, and she'll actually be joined by a special guest, which will be announced soon. So keep a lookout for that. You can register. Margaret, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all your inputs and, you know, kind of positioning yourself alongside VolunteerMatch. We were really excited by the findings of the CECP report, and we appreciate your time in joining us today.
Really appreciate being part of this important release of this great data. I'm sure it'll only grow over time and already has immense value.
Great, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much.